William Mark Felt Sr. was an American law enforcement officer who worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) from 1942 to 1973 and was known for his role in the Watergate scandal. Felt was an FBI special agent who eventually rose to the position Deputy Director, the Bureau's second highest ranking post. Felt worked in several FBI field offices prior to his promotion to the Bureau's headquarters. In 1980, he was convicted of having violated the civil rights of people thought to be associated with members of the Weather Underground by ordering FBI agents to break into their homes and search their premises as part of an attempt to prevent bombings. He was ordered to pay a fine but was pardoned by President Ronald Reagan during his appeal. In 2005, at age 91, Felt revealed to Vanity Fair magazine that during his tenure as Deputy Director of the FBI, he had been the notorious anonymous sources known as Deep Throats, who provided the Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein with critical information about the Watergate scandal, which ultimately led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon in 1974. Woodward, who had long vowed not to reveal Deep Throat's identity while the source was still alive, quickly confirmed Felt's claim. Though Felt's identity as Deep Throat was suspected, including by Nixon himself, it had generally remained a secret for 30 years. Felt finally acknowledged that he was Deep Throat after being persuaded by his daughter to reveal his identity before his death. Felt published two memoirs, The FBI Pyramid in 1979 and A G-Man's Life, written with John O'Connor in 2006. In 2012, the FBI released Felt's personal file covering the period from 1941 to 1978. The agency also released files pertaining to an extortion threat made against Felt in 1956. As Deputy Director, Felt saw everything compiled on Watergate before it was given to Gray. The agent in charge, Charles Nuzum, sent his findings to Investigative Division Head Robert Gebhardt, who passed the information on to Felt. From the day of the burglary, June 17, 1972, until the FBI investigation was mostly completed in June 1973, Felt was the key control point for FBI information. He had been among the first to learn of the investigation, being informed the morning of June 17. Ronald Kessler, who spoke to former Bureau agents, reported that throughout the investigation they were amazed to see material in Woodward and Bernstein's stories lifted almost verbatim from their reports of interviews a few days or weeks earlier. Bob Woodward first describes his sources, nicknamed Deep Throat in All the President's Men, as a source in the executive branch who had access to information at CRP, the committee to re-elect the president, Nixon's 1972 campaign organization, as well as the White House. In the book, Deep Throat is described as an incorrigible gossip who was in a unique position to observe the executive branch, a man whose fight had been worn out into many battles. Woodward had known the source before Watergate and had discussed politics and government with him. In 2005, Woodward wrote that he first met Felt at the White House in 1969 or 1970. Woodward was working as an aide to Admiral Thomas Hinman Murrow, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and was delivering papers to the White House Situation Room. In his book, The Secret Man, Woodward described Felt as a tall man with perfectly combed gray hair, distinguished looking, with a studied air of confidence, even what might be called a command presence. They stayed in contact and spoke on telephone several times. When Woodward started working at the Washington Post, he phoned Felt on several occasions to ask for information for articles in the paper. Felt's information, taken on a promise that Woodward would never reveal its origin, was a source for a few stories, notably for an article on May 18, 1972 about Arthur Bremer, who shot George Wallace. When the Watergate story broke, Woodward called on Felt. Felt told Woodward on June 19 that E. Howard Hunt, who had connections to Nixon, was involved. The telephone number of his White House office had been listed in the address book of one of the burglars. Initially, Woodward's source was known at the Post as My Friend. Post editor Howard Simmons tagged him as Deep Throat after the widely known pornographic film Deep Throat. According to Woodward, Simmons thought of the term because Felt had been providing information on a deep background basis. When Felt revealed his role in 2005, it was noted that my friend has the same initial letters as Mark Felt. Woodward's notes from interviewing Felt were marked MF, which Woodward says was not very good tradecraft. Woodward explained that when he wanted to meet Deep Throat, he would move a flower pot with a red flag on his apartment balcony. He lived at number 617 Webster House, 1718 P Street Northwest. On occasions when Deep Throat wanted a meeting, he would circle the page number on page 20 of Woodward's copy of the New York Times delivered to his building and draw clock hands to signal the hour. Adrian Havil questioned these claims in his 1993 biography of Woodward and Bernstein. He said Woodward's balcony faced an interior courtyard and was not visible from the street. Woodward said that the courtyard had been bricked in since he lived there. Havil also said the Times was not delivered in copies marked by apartment, but Woodward and a former neighbor disputed this claim. Woodward said, "How Felt could have made a daily observation of my balcony is still a mystery to me. At the time, the back of my building was not enclosed, so anyone could have driven in the back alley to observe my balcony. In addition, my balcony and the back of the apartment complex faced onto a courtyard or back area that was shared with a number of other apartment or office buildings in the area. My balcony could have been seen from dozens of apartments or offices. There were several embassies in the area. The Iraqi embassy was down the street, and I thought it possible that the FBI had surveillance or listening posts nearby. Could Felt have had the counterintelligence agents regularly report on the status of my flag and flower pot? That seemed unlikely, but not impossible." Days after the burglary, Nixon and White House Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman talked about putting pressure on the FBI to slow down the investigation. The District of Columbia police had summoned the FBI because they found the burglars had wiretapping equipment. Wiretapping is a crime investigated by the FBI. Haldeman told President Nixon on June 23, 1972 that Felt would want to cooperate because he is ambitious. These tapes were not declassified and revealed for some time. Haldeman later initially suspected lower-level FBI agents, including Angelo Lano, of speaking to the Post. But in a tapped conversation on October 19, 1972, Haldeman told the president that the sources had said that Felt was speaking to the press. "You can't say anything about this because it will screw up our source and there is a real concern. Mitchell is the only one who knows about this and he feels strongly that we better not do anything because if we move on him, he will go out and unload everything. He knows everything that's to be known in the FBI. He has access to absolutely everything." Haldeman also said that he had spoken to White House counsel John W. Dean about punishing Felt, but Dean said Felt had committed no crime and could not be prosecuted. When acting FBI Director Gray returned from his sick leave in January 1973, he confronted Felt about being the source for Woodward and Bernstein. Gray said he had defended Felt to Attorney General Richard Clendeninst. "You know, Mark, Dick Clendeninst told me I ought to get rid of you," he says. "White House staff members are concerned that you are the FBI sources of leaks to Woodward and Bernstein." Felt replied, "Pat, I haven't leaked anything to anybody," Gray told Felt. "I told Clendeninst that you have worked with me in a very competent manner and I am convinced that you are completely loyal. I told him I was not going to move you out. Clendeninst told me, Pat, I love you for that." On February 17, 1973, Nixon nominated Gray as Hoover's permanent replacement as director. Until then, Gray had been in limbo as acting director. In another tapped conversation on February 28, Nixon spoke to Dean about Felt's acting as an informant and mentioned that he had never met Felt. Gray was forced to resign on April 27 after it was revealed that he had destroyed a file that had been in the White House safe of E. Howard Hunt. Gray recommended Felt as his successor. The day Gray resigned, Clendeninst spoke to Nixon, urging him to appoint Felt as director of the FBI. Nixon instead appointed William Ruckelshaus as acting director. Stanley Kutler reported that Nixon said, "I don't want him. I can't have him. I just talked to Bill Ruckelshaus and Bill is a Mr. Clean and I want a fellow in there who is no part of the old guard and who is no part of that infighting in there." On another White House tape from May 11, 1973, Nixon and White House Chief of Staff Alexander Haig spoke of Felt leaking material to the New York Times. Nixon said, "He is a bad guy. You see, He said that William Sullivan had told him of Felt's ambition to be director of the bureau.